Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Okay, we are now at 3 o'clock. I think everyone who was in the waiting room is in. I'll keep letting people in as they come in, but I'm Kirk Lehman. I'm a planner for Iowa City, for the city of Iowa City. I'll be the host for today's presentation. Thank you all for attending. It's the Planning on Tap session, which is one of a series of free monthly webinars held by the Iowa chapter of the American Planning Association. Each session explores a different planning topic, and all sessions are eligible for CM credit, so we'd encourage you to take advantage of that. For today's session, just in terms of some background, we're talking about exploring the 2020 census. So as you all know, the Decennial Census is an essential source of data for planners, provides critical insight into demographic and socioeconomic trends. So the goal is really to understand how data is collected and what it says so that we can make informed decisions as planners, especially as things change over time. So as far as today's session, we will have 3 speakers today, and they'll give their presentations, and we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. And I will introduce the speakers now. First, we have Kira Bradovich, who is a data dissemination specialist for the U.S. Census Bureau, serving the state of Iowa. Formerly, she served as a senior partnership specialist for the Chicago region during the 2020 Decennial Census. She grew up in Omaha, the child of Iowans, and currently resides in Chicago. She holds an LLM in Public International Law from the University of Kent, an MS in International Public Service from DePaul University, and a BA from Gustavus Adolphus College. Our second speaker will be Gary Krob, who's the coordinator of the Iowa's State Data Center, a federal state cooperative program with the U.S. Census Bureau, and the State Data Center is a division of the State Library of Iowa. Gary has been with the Data Center since 2001. And he works with the Census Bureau and its data extensively and is widely quoted in the media. He is a native Iowan growing up near Cedar Rapids and a graduate of Iowa State University. He is also the coordinator of the Federal State Cooperative Program for Population Estimates and the Federal State Cooperative Program for Population Projections, as well as the governor's liaison to the U.S. Census Bureau for the state of Iowa. Finally, we will have Liesl Eathington, who's a research scientist in the Department of Economics at Iowa State University. She studies indicators of local economic growth and decline in Iowa and the Midwest, and she collaborates with ISU Extension on community development outreach and applied research initiatives. Liesl's educational background includes a Master of Business Administration from Iowa State University and a Bachelor of Science degree in Finance from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And with that, I did just want to try and get this started now since we have 3 speakers speaking and I wanted time for questions. So kicking us off is Kira, and I will let her start us off then. Let me know if you need me to share the screen, and otherwise, if you can do it, then great.
Right now, it is not restarted yet. So we should be good. Thank you, everyone. As Kirk mentioned, my name is Kira Bradovich. I am a data dissemination specialist. So I am here to serve the state of Iowa. If there are any data needs that you have, if there's any questions you have about census data, if you have any need for training or anything on any of our tools, I am here to help. So please feel free to contact me and reach out. My email's up here, and it's also at the end. Kirk already kind of went through my background, but when I served as a senior partnership specialist, we worked throughout the Chicago region and came to Iowa at several different spots personally for disability and advocacy outreach in that state. So it was really great to be able to carry on and work for the census in this capacity to help provide and basically give back the data that you all helped us collect. And we're very, very appreciative of that. So today I'm just going to give a brief overview of the census and all that we do. I'm going to give an overview of what was planned for and then what happened with the 2020 Decennial Census, so that you can kind of get a little bit better of a picture of the data that you have and when it was collected and what changed in that period. And then I'll go over a few decennial data trends and changes, and I'll end with some suggested data tools and resources for you all. So we're the largest statistical agency with the federal government, and we conduct over 130 censuses every year. So we are not just the decennial. We have a myriad of other surveys. One of our biggest, which you've probably heard of and which Gary mentioned earlier, which is very true to us, is that many of you are using ACS data without realizing it. And there's a lot of really great data that we cover through that that kind of gives you that picture that the decennial only gives you every 10 years. And the ACS actually comes out of the decennial. It's something that used to be that long form census that you'd receive, some people would receive. And so what we realized was we really need to be doing this more frequently. We need to get better data, more up-to-date data. And so we're going to do this yearly. So we look at 3.5 million addresses for that survey every year. And then we have a variety of economic and surveys and programs, including the economic census, which just took place this year. So that will have everything on finances to construction, and will give a really good picture of the businesses in our country. There are a variety of census geographies that I'm sure you're all familiar with, being planners and geographers and the like. So I won't go through all of this, but especially with the decennial data, we, the decennial, go all the way down to what's called a block group. We start at the nation, and we break things up into, we look at SICTAs, which are similar to zip codes, urban areas. We look at different school districts, and you can access a lot of this data in different geographies. But to look at Census 2020 decennial data and to understand kind of how that's broken down, a lot of that data is taken by the state. We then bring it down to the county level. We bring it down to the tract, the census tract in the county. And then in every census tract, there's a block group of blocks. And while the ACS data goes all the way down to those block groups, the decennial is really our only major survey that we do that gives that data at the block level. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure that we're keeping everyone's information private. And so the limited amount of data that we take from the decennial, we are able to release at that block level. So I'm sure you're aware in your own lives that 2020 was quite a year for everyone and changed a lot of the plans that we had made. For the decennial, you know, we have had a history of massive hurricanes and disasters taking place. We've done the decennial through world wars, but the pandemic was really a unique experience for us. And so we really tried to come together, and I'm really proud of people that I worked with on everything we tried to do to make sure that we could really count everyone where they were living once and only once and in the right place. So as you're probably aware, we conduct the decennial census because of the Constitution. So Article 1, Section 2 mandates that every 10 years, we count every person dwelling in the United States. This data is used to reapportion seats in the House. It's used to decide how to realign congressional districts, and it plays a huge role in determining the distribution of federal funds. And that's, I'm sure, something that you're well aware of. So from the 2020 decennial census, in the plan, it was, again, census is always the largest peacetime operation in the United States. Every 10 years this happens. We hire more people than any operation at one time. And for the first time ever, we were able to have an internet self-response option. So we were able to take answers to our questionnaire from people coming to your door, from you mailing in your census form, as well as calling. But for the first time, we added that internet option, and that really, really saved us in the end with the 2020 census, because it provided a very safe and effective option for people to respond. I worked as a part of the Community Partnership Engagement Program. That's something that we've had for the past few censuses. And our whole focus was reaching out and working to make sure that we were, working with community partners, working with governments, working with businesses to help people in the community understand and be educated as to why it's so important to respond to the census. And we did a lot of work in Iowa, especially with group quarters. We'll touch on that in a little bit when I talk about urban and rural changes, but we sent many of my team I sent them to Iowa at different points as partnership specialists to work to make sure that we were counting everyone there and trying to get as best a count as we could, despite the pandemic. And then we really reshaped our whole mobile questionnaire assistance plan that had been very focused on in-person, huge gatherings inside, hosted by our partners throughout the 8-state region. But instead, we focused a lot on outdoor events, smaller events, virtual events, everything we could do to really have our field representatives out there and working with the community to make sure people responded to the census safely. And this is a timeline. I won't go through all of it, but I have yet to find an image. I created this. All of this information is on our website in a lot of different spots. And I'm assuming these slides will be shared. But this can really give you a good picture of how much our time frame changed. In particular, the fact that we went from ending on July 31st to ending on October 15th for our self-response. So we greatly extended that. And we saw that 80% of the people that responded themselves, those were done online. So that was a really good number for that. We got a good chunk of our 67% respondents that way. Our non-response follow-up, when people go to your door, that also was extended. And I did want to touch on the group quarters and service-based enumeration, because typically we run service-based enumeration. That's the night that we all go out, the night before Census Day, which is April 1st. And we count everyone who is experiencing homelessness, everyone who does not have a dwelling, and we send teams of people out, and it's usually done, overnight, basically. Well, with the pandemic, we had to do this. We had to change this from 1 night to 8 nights, and so this was a much more expanded operation. And they waited so long because they wanted to make sure they had the best plan in place to count everyone. Same thing with mobile questionnaire assistance. We extended that greatly, and it was delayed at the start. And then we did note that with our post-enumeration survey, so that's what we do to make sure our data is accurate, that we noted that our internet self-response rate was above 94%. So considering everything that happened, this schedule was what we used. And if you have any questions on this later, please don't hesitate to let me know. So we have a lot of different data coming out from the decennial at different points. We just had a demographic profile released on May 25th. It covers things like age and sex and race, but it's also going to be able to give you a lot of data on, who lives in the household, how are they related? Is it a grandparent with their grandchild, or is it a group of people who are not related? Some of that information I know can be really important for planners. It definitely covers information on group quarters, as well as, who is living in those homes, how long have they lived there or rented. We also had today, I didn't want to put it on the slides because I didn't know for sure if it would happen, but today did come out information on island areas. So if you're looking at a broader form of census data, you can definitely check out some of those new releases, and we will continue to have releases throughout the fall. So I wanted to touch on just a couple of decennial data trends that we saw. For congressional apportionment, you probably were aware that there were some changes throughout the United States. Some states like Texas gained 2 or more representatives, and some states like Illinois, we did lose 1. So that definitely has an impact on each of these states' voices in government, and Iowa managed to have no change. And I also wanted to touch base on something, and I highly encourage you all, if you are interested in knowing where our money goes, so where the data that we collect, how that affects the money that comes from the federal government. When you look at usaspending.gov, it's a mapping tool from the Department of Treasury, and it can provide some, and I would caution you, this is not necessarily an exact number, this is an estimate, so we often say up to in our vernacular, but that you have about $11,263 in 2020 that was really riding on that decennial account for every person living in Iowa. And then we do have a few population trends across the country that I wanted to touch on. The first is that we actually grew at our slowest rate as a nation since the 1930s. And you can note here that we had that 7.4 rate versus the 1930s to 40s when it was 7.3. And we've definitely seen some fluctuation up and down. And we have had changes to state populations as well. So less than half of the nation's counties gained population between 2010 and 2020. But at the same time, these metro areas are 80% of them are basically growing during the same time frame. And you'll note here in Iowa that there wasn't too much of a change, and that some of these other states definitely grew quite a bit. But that could be an interesting picture to look at as you're considering your neighboring states. You know, my original home state grew a little bit, and my current state, there was no change at all whatsoever. So you did better than us, I guess, in having some changes to your population. And then I do want to touch on the definitions that are going to be used when you're viewing data about the place that you're looking at, your census geography place. There are there's changes to what urban and rural areas are considered. So the first thing to kind of point out is that traditionally, we looked at urban areas based on population. This hasn't been changed since 1910. It was changed by Truman's administration at that time. And so they changed it and they said, okay, we need to look at places that have 2,500 people or more. These are considered urban areas. And there were a variety of definitions beyond that, but that was the general, you had to have at least 2,500 people. But now we have, after the decennial, decided that with the decennial data and from here on out, we are going to change the definition of urban versus rural to now be 5,000 people, because there has been quite a change in population since that point, and urban and rural areas have changed a lot as well. But then we also thought, okay, well, places, especially during our decennial, our special decennial, right, where people were suddenly not where they were normally going to be on April 1st. So colleges, universities, suddenly you don't have all the students back from spring break. You have students staying home with their parents. So we added the other option that a place can also qualify as an urban area if they have at least 2,000 housing units. And so this really can help with some of that. And we decided this based on that Federal Register notice that we put out seeking feedback. And I encourage you all to look for additional federal registration notices, sign up for census at census.gov for updates, because we would love your input as we start planning for 2030. We also changed with the new urban area definition, and we changed it a bit so that it's now based on housing unit density measured at the census block level at 425 units per square mile. And so we believe and have seen that this provides a more direct measure of the developed landscape as it becomes further and further densely developed. And it also provides the ability to update urban areas between the censuses. So if you are filling out, and I hope you are, or your cities are all filling out the BAS survey every year, and you're getting in touch with our geography department as much as you can, and I'm also happy to put you in touch with them. The hope is that we can, as you know, urban and rural areas change in the interim, that we'll be able to have some flexibility in making sure that we can update those urban areas in between those 10 years. And then just exploring a little bit of the census data that is available. I just wanted to point out a few of the tools that I do recommend you all check out if you want to look at decennial data, and as well as other data from some of our surveys. And the primary one for decennial data, and just most of our data in general, is our data.census.gov, or DCG as we call it, because it doesn't have an actual name, just that. So it's a great tool where you can explore all of those different decennial data releases, all of that data. There's a mapping feature within it. You can easily download all of those tables, and it's a really great tool to use. We also have our quick facts tool, which is great. You can use it on your phone if you need a quick fact from the census data. And then if you're really trying to look at census data at a, in a raw data format, we do have our census API. So for those of you who are data users, you probably know what that is. If anyone would like to learn how to do this, we can also train you on accessing that. And then I did want to touch on a couple others that might be relevant to you. My favorite tool is our microdata access tool. Now, because it's microdata, you can't go down to the smallest geography as you can within data.census.gov due to privacy. But what it does allow you to do is create everything from scratch. So you can create a table, you can recode, for instance, a group of ages. So if the age answer, is like 1 to 99, then you can do a set like from 20. I want to know between the ages of 20 and 23. I want data on a specific ethnicity. I want data on someone who's a grandparent living with their grandchild, right? You can create a lot of that data on your own using that tool. And then we also have our Census Business Builder, which is a mapping tool that will also give you reports on businesses and industries. It's quite interactive, and I encourage you to check that out. And of course, you're probably all familiar with TigerWeb, which if you do anything with geography and planning, it really is going to give you a good picture of the legal and statistical geography boundaries that exist that the census relies on. And I think that's about it for time for me. So I definitely encourage you to connect with me. That QR on the screen will bring up my contact card. But please feel free to call me, email me. I am here. You're also definitely welcome to check out our website, census.gov /academy. Has a ton of trainings on it, video trainings, and a lot of other information. And then if you just search data tools and census, you'll see that we have over 100 different data tools at your disposal. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kira. And with that, we will turn it over to Gary. And I just want to say this now, since some of you have started asking questions in the meeting chat, we'll answer questions at the end. So I encourage you to continue to write those questions down as you have them. But with that, we'll turn it over to Gary.
Okay, give me just 1 second. And make this big. How's that look for everybody? We're going to go with good because I can't hear you. You can hear me. That's all that matters.
We can hear you, but we're currently seeing the closed screen, like we're seeing it as if you just opened up PowerPoint.
Really? Because I'm seeing it both ways.
Might be that the correct screen being shared is the wrong one.
No, I'll try sharing again. Try that one. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, we'll go from there. Okay, hi, thanks. My name is Gary Krob. I am the coordinator for the State Data Center, as was mentioned. Liesl and I get the pleasure of talking to you about Iowa data, not just what's going on nationally, because while interesting, what you're all interested in is probably more local. Some housekeeping. Usually I like to tell you to interrupt me while I'm talking, because if you don't, I will blabble on. But since we're doing Q&As at the end, throw it in the chat or just jot it down and ask me at the end of all of this, because I do want to make sure I get your questions answered. But be forewarned, that means I am going to drone a bit. Let's see, here we go. And advancing, there we go. So we're gonna look at first state population trends in Iowa. A lot of times when I go out and talk to various folks out in the state, people like to talk about how Iowa is losing population. And I then like to show this little slide and say that, well, that's just not happening. We really only had 2 periods where the state lost population since the 1900s. First was World War II. That's that big dip you see there in the kind of in the middle of the screen. And then the last one for us was the farm crisis in the early to mid 80s. Since then, Iowa actually has gained population every year. I use the term slow and steady because if you look at that chart, you see it's not you don't see a lot of leaps and bounds on the bar chart. You just see a kind of nice gentle hill going up. This is what the population change in the United States looked like in the same time period, 1900 to 2020. And you'll see in the states in green there on the left, or mainly on the left, is out west, and those are states that increased by 500% or more. And so a lot of that would be like the westward expansion and just some basic population growth as people started moving that direction. If we look, though, at 1900 to 2020, with states that grew by at least 100% or more, so these are states that doubled in size, you'll see that most of the nation is green. There are a few of us that are orange, but for the most part, states have increased pretty significantly in that 120 time period. But now we go to this slide. This is the number of states that have increased by 50% or more. Iowa is the only state in the nation that has not increased by more than 50% since the 1900s. Second closest, I think I wrote down, is Nebraska at 84.0%. We grew at 42.9%. So you'll see the second quote unquote slowest growing state in Nebraska actually almost doubled what our growth rate during that same time period. So I think that plays a part a lot of times when people say Iowa's losing population, because we don't generally see the same types of growth that really 49 out of 50 states have seen. But to be a little bit more optimistic, if we look at this population change just in the last 10 years, as was mentioned, U.S. growth during this time frame was 7.4%. Iowa grew by 4.7%, as I mentioned. And these are our neighboring states, or some of the Midwest states. And you'll see that we actually grew at a faster rate than a good chunk of our Midwest neighbors. There is that, I don't want to call North Dakota an anomaly, but that 15.8% increase up there. Which does tend to color things a little bit for us, but otherwise, if you do look at how we've kept pace with our neighboring states, things do tend to look a little bit better than that last slide where we were the lonely orange state in the vast sea of green. This is the only slide where I'm going to actually. This has population estimates data, and the reason I have that in here because I kind of want to explain how the estimates program creates their estimates, but the other reason is because
I think we basically are, though. We're now entering, once we put the required forms in.
Hi, if everyone could just mute, I'm gonna.
Yeah, they're in the
this
Design Hub 2023 comp plan required forms, and they're not showing up for you.
Okay. Good.
So anyway, so I'm using the population estimates because one of the things I like about the estimates data is I can look at change year to year, and we can look at what is driving population in our state. And so the estimates uses a couple different measures in order to create their estimates. And one of the things is natural change, so births minus deaths, and then you have migration data. So they look at IRS data. There's a couple other administrative record sources that they use to look at how many people are moving in and out of the state of Iowa. You'll see from 2000 to 2009, the natural change was positive, 106,000. We had positive international migrations, 36,000. We did have a pretty significant domestic migration loss of 52,000. But then this last decade, both the international migration number went up, which is good, and the net state-to-state domestic migration, while still a negative, while still a loss, actually was a much smaller number than in the last 9 years. Of note, and what we're seeing, the natural change also is a much small, not much, but it's a smaller number than it was in 2000 and 2009. And there is, obviously every indication that we're seeing birth rates decline and death rates, obviously, and with baby boomers and stuff like that, death rates increasing. So this natural change number, while it used to be a little bit more static, is fluctuating a bit more now. And because of that, we do need to probably pay a little bit more attention to the international and the domestic migration as far as Iowa's population growth goes. This chart actually shows from 2000 to 2020 broken out international and domestic migration. You can see historically Iowa has just had a positive international migration. We get a lot of people moving into the state from other countries. And historically, we've had a lot of negative domestic migration, a lot of people who lived in parts of Iowa that no longer do. Now, where they moved to, that's a whole nother slide and a whole nother hour presentation, which I can't get into right now. So now we're going to go to county population trends. This is just data from the 2020 census. It kind of just shows some population groupings of where the population in the counties are in Iowa. You'll see this decade we actually have 2 counties that are under 5,000 in total population. I didn't pick on Adams, but I would always talk about Adams because it was the sole county that was under 5,000. But Ringgold now has joined that group. You'll see that most of the state is actually in that 5,000 to 20,000 range. I also think this is a big reason why people think population in Iowa is declining when I'm out talking to people in Grundy County. This shows the population change in Iowa from 1980 to 2020 in Iowa's counties. And you'll see all those counties in orange have lost population and all the counties in blue have gained population. So 71 counties during that time frame lost population. So it's really easy for me to go out and talk to you about how Iowa's population is growing and things are looking, we're doing good. We're keeping up with everybody. But if you live in Franklin, you don't see that. If you live in Alameda, you're not seeing it. And I think that's where sometimes the disconnect can be, and understanding where those population centers are. And in this case, aside from 2 counties, all of Iowa's population growth, I'll just go to the next slide because this actually looks for 2010 to 2020. Doesn't change a lot. 73 counties lost population, 26 have gained. All of the population growth, except for 2 counties, is either in or adjacent to a metropolitan area in our state. 2 exceptions, Dickinson, that's Spirit Lake. So I'm assuming there's a little bit of the recreational housing up there that may be impacting that number. Davis, I'm not sure about. It's close to Jefferson, but 7.5% increase in 10 years is pretty significant. And I just have to feign ignorance on what's causing that population growth. Liesl might have a better idea, but she's shaking her head. No, great. Well, I threw under the bus. Sorry. But other than those 2 counties, all these other blue counties are, metropolitan counties or adjacent to a metropolitan county. And that's really where we're seeing the population cluster. Now, if you look at migration data, again, didn't have time to put this in there. And there's a couple of census surveys out there called county to county migration, where you can look at where counties are moving to and from. And there is a lot of data to support that some of these rural counties are moving to the urban counties. Now, some of them are moving out of state. We saw that domestic number, so we know the domestic migration numbers. We know people are leaving the state, but there is also some data to support migration from the rural counties closer to the urban areas, closer to probably services and things like that. If we also look at Iowa County population under 10,000, so that's, how many counties did we have under 10? In that first 20 years, it increased from 15 to 18. So there wasn't a big change. 3 counties, but, in that 20-year time period. But since 2000 and 2020, we've had kind of a little bit more of a jump in the number of counties that are declining at a pretty significant rate to be under 10,000. And then these are just a list of those county population changes from that time period. You'll see the fastest growing county in the state of Iowa is Dallas County at 23.7%. Johnson, I'd like to say is a close second at 87.7, but it's up there. But when I look at this, I like to point out, for Johnson and Polk, 87% growth or 62% growth. That's pretty significant for a county that has a metropolitan area. So you're seeing some good growth in that area. Now Dallas obviously, blows everyone out of the water with that 237%. But I still think some of these metropolitan areas, at least the Iowa City metropolitan and then the Des Moines, West Des Moines metropolitan area, are doing quite well. And I guess not technically, Dallas County is part of the Des Moines, West Des Moines metropolitan. Then the fastest declining we see there on those 5 counties on the right-hand side, with Pocahontas being the having lost the most population in that 40-year time period. So I'm almost done because I wanted to leave plenty of time for Liesl to talk about the funner race and age stuff. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple things about me. So the State Data Center, we are that federal state cooperative program, and I'm here to actually help you find and understand the data that's out there. I have a website, iowadatacenter.org. We have I always say we, I gotta stop doing that. It's just me in my own little office. I have about 150 plus dashboards on my website that have Iowa specific data drawing from mainly census, so Decennial, the American Community Survey, population estimates, some economic surveys, some of the building permit surveys, things like that that the Census Bureau does. So it's heavily Census Bureau focused, but it's Iowa data. With the exception, I do have some state level. So if you want to compare Iowa to Nebraska, Iowa to California, you can do that. But I have data by state, all 99 counties, all 941 cities in Iowa, all, oh gosh, I can't even remember the number, but all the school districts in Iowa. And the metropolitan and micropolitan areas. So I use Tableau, they're interactive, they're fairly easy to use, but they have some of them have pretty visualization, some of them don't, but they also have behind the scenes or on a separate tab, a nice cross tab if you need just the raw data. And like I said, I think they're fairly easy to use, but if you have any questions or concerns, the next slide will be the most important for you. I also answer data requests, so please, if you're busy, you have a question, call me, or email would be better actually. Who are we kidding anymore? The last thing I want to hear is that you spend half an hour looking for something that I can tell you in 5 minutes either doesn't exist or here's the number. Your job is to do other things. My job is to do this. My job is to help you out. I don't want to enable you and not, I encourage you to go out and look for the data and try to, find it. That's why I have the website. But I sure don't want you wasting your time and energy on something that I can do for you. Then there's a couple other services I do. I create profiles. They're PDFs about different Iowa population groups, like African Americans in Iowa, Latinos in Iowa, women in Iowa. Comes out every year, and those are available on the website as well. But the most important slide that I'm going to end with is this. It is my contact information. Everything else was interesting. This is important. If you need anything, please, please, please give me a call, send me an email. I have no job unless you all are giving me requests and needing information from me, and I'm here to help you do what you do. And with that, I am done.
And we'll turn it over to Liesl.
I'm probably going to have the same issue that Gary did on which PowerPoint slide you see. So let me get started here. Okay, do you see little or big?
We see the presenter view.
Okay. Try again. How about now?
Now you're good to go. Thanks.
Okay, great. So I got to choose, yes, the fun topic, age and diversity highlights. And one of these is really simple, and the other one is actually really wonderfully complicated. And I'm going to do the simple one first, which is the age, because that's pretty objectively measured. Some important issues for Iowa, though. So what I'm going to look at, whoa, sticky keyboard. You just got a sneak peek at my whole presentation. So what I'm going to show you is some comparisons looking at different regions. I want to compare Iowa to the US, to that 12-state Midwest region that you've seen a little bit of so far. And then also within Iowa, we want to look at how the state compares to county groups by urbanization level. And by that, I'm essentially going to break the state into 3 different groups: counties that are in metropolitan areas, counties that are in micropolitan statistical areas. Those are the ones with a core city between 10,000 and 50,000. So just that next level down. And then the third group of counties will be any counties that are outside of a metro or micro area. Some people refer to those as rural. That's not the actual Census Bureau definition of rural, but in Iowa, I think people tend to call those the rural counties. And I'm really interested for today just in 2 different age breakouts. The first one will be the classic population pyramids that show 5-year age groups and sex. And as planners, hopefully you've all seen those in your early classes. And then the second is looking at one age group in particular that's really a focus for Iowa right now because of our labor force issues and worker shortages. And that's the group in the prime working age. That's defined as people between the ages of 25 to 54, where productivity is really high. I actually just exited that group. Congratulations to me. But then we'll also look at the under 25 and the 55 plus age groups. So the population pyramids, I don't want to spend a lot of time on them, Iowa's going to appear on the left in every one, and what'll change is the group on the right. It'll be a different region, but just kind of compare the shapes of these as we fly through them. Looking at Iowa versus the United States, I know we have the reputation of being a really elderly state, but if you start looking at the numbers at the very top of the pyramids, we're not actually that much higher than the United States in a lot of those age groups. Where we really start to see the difference in Iowa is in that middle section where we just get a little bit leaner than the United States in our adults. Probably they're a little bit older now because these are from the 2020 census, but people in the 50 to 54 age group, 45 to 49. So we definitely take a dip there. We actually look a little bit better than the United States in the under 5 and 5 to 9 year age groups. So now I'm going to just flip it real quick to the Midwest and back to just compare the difference between the Midwest and US. And looking at Iowa, we really pretty closely resemble the region that we're in. But now if we look at our metropolitan areas over on the right versus the state as a whole, we're starting to look a little bit more like that classic pyramid, even though we've lost our base. So you can see the age distributions really favor the metropolitan areas. When we look at the micro areas, here's where we start to see some of the stress that's being experienced out in those mid-sized cities and the counties and the regions around them. So the young adults, they just, they leave, we don't get them back. Their parents are gone, so they're not born there. It's just a compounding effect. And when we go to the counties outside a metro or micro area, it's even more profound. So this is the stress that employers are feeling. It's the stress that the school districts are facing, retailers, housing issues. This is all pretty graphic example of what's going on out there. And here is just a simplified version of it, looking at that prime working age. That's the middle orange bar in this graph. So in the US, about 39, almost 40% of the population was within that prime working age group. In Iowa, a little bit less, and we have a little bit more in the under 25 than the US. A lot of this in Iowa we see because we have such great colleges. We tend to attract people to our colleges. Whether or not we can keep them is a different issue, but a lot of times we actually show pretty well in this segment of the population. And really not too much different again than the US in the percent over 55. Our metro areas, again, that advantage showing up 38% in the prime working age group, better in the younger age group and lower in the over 55. And our micro and other counties, you can again see much more stacked in the older age groups. So that's it for age. I want to move on to the racial and ethnic diversity just because it's so wonderfully complicated. And before we start, I've been thinking a lot more about questions about how and why we classify people into racial and ethnic groups. It used to be I just took it for granted. I just did it. I put out the charts, the graphs, never really gave it much thought. But I've been thinking about it a lot more, and I think a lot of other people have too. So we have, first big question is, how do we even classify people by race and ethnicity? We have to have these definitions administratively because we use the data for a lot of things, but that process is both complicated and troubling. And then now, because we self-report race and ethnicity for the most part on our data collection instruments, we bring in that factor of how do we perceive our own race and ethnicity? And this evolves over time and it's not clear cut. So these two issues make the use of race and ethnicity data a lot more complicated than we might think. Then the second issue is just the notion of diversity. What is diversity? There is no actual definition of diversity. And it really matters, what your perspective is, how you define it. The Census Bureau has been using some really interesting alternative measures recently for diversity, and I'm going to show you a few of those. And then finally, we will get to some data on race and ethnicity. So a couple of the issues, classifying race and ethnicity administratively. One problem is the definitions have changed over time, which makes it hard to look at trends. But at the same time, they don't necessarily change fast enough to keep up with how our population is changing. And then the groupings that we use, they're always subjective. They're social and political constructs. They're not biological. And oftentimes the groups that we use and how we use them, it's political and troubling. We do have federal standards that are used for our federal agencies, and a lot of other agencies use those as well. So you can see SPD 15 was issued in 1977, about 20 years later, revised again. There's a working group that issued recommendations for changes now. So roughly every 20 to 25 years, we revisit this. This, I'm afraid we don't have time to really go through it, but it's just to show over time, our categories have changed. So we might think they've been immutable over time. Darn it. Sorry about that. All right, are we back?
Although we're looking at the non-presentation screen.
All right. I don't know why it's doing this. And okay, are we back?
We're back.
Okay. So anyway, the definitions changed that are used. Some of the things that the working group has recommended that might be different by the time we do the next census is we might collect race and ethnicity using one combined question instead of the two categories that we have now. It's been recommended that we add a Middle Eastern or North African category, and that would come out of what is now in the white category. The working group has recommended that we stop using the terms majority and minority in the definitions, and then a couple of other language changes that just reflect our increasing sensitivity, I think, to how we label people. A lot of changes that were really apparent in the last census, that how we define ourselves when we self-report race and ethnicity has really changed a lot. In this chart, you can see way over on the right, there's some big bars. Those are changes in the percentage of people reporting in those groups. Some other race and two or more races were two of the most rapidly growing groups. Those probably were not all just new people. They might have been people shifting into those categories because they felt they defined them better. We saw a very similar pattern in Iowa from 2010 to 2020. So then the next issue, once we get past all of the problems of defining racial and ethnic groups and self-reporting them, we also need to think about how we define diversity. And I think the one that I see a lot is just using the reference group, white alone, not Hispanic, Latino, which in Iowa is the majority group. And then everything else is minority, and then percent minority is what we tend to think of as, oh, we're so diverse. Alternative measures, which I think really capture better what we're trying to achieve, is the diversity index, and then also prevalence rankings and diffusion scores. I've got recommended reading here, so if you want to learn more about those, just go to these links. There's some great stuff at the Census Bureau on how they're using these measures. And I'm just going to show you the diversity index. So here's an example of one of the infographics that the Census Bureau has put together. Basically, it's just measuring that the probability that two people that you choose randomly, for example, in Iowa, would be from different racial or ethnic groups. And if we look at the map here, the Census Bureau's done, Iowa's low diversity is pretty apparent. They also use a prevalence and diffusion score, so great infographics there at the Census Bureau. So here we're looking at Iowa, and our diversity index, and mine might be a little bit more simplified than the Census Bureau. I'm not sure I used exactly the same number of groupings, but our score was about 31%, much lower than the Midwest, which was 45%. US was about 61%. And then you can see breaking out into these same county groups, our metros tend to be more diverse than the state average. The micros pretty close to the state average, and then much lower diversity outside those two types of counties. And then here is a map showing the diversity index by county. And I've got the percentages labeled, so you can see the counties that really stand out, tend to be our meatpacking counties. Other ag processing type industries do tend to attract different type of workforce. And so we see a lot of our diversity coming from there. And that's all that I had prepared. So hopefully there's lots of time for questions.
Okay, well, we have 10 minutes for questions right now. I see that we have some that were sent. The first question was, for those of us that don't access census data often, what data tool is the easiest to use for city-specific data? And it looks like that might have been answered.
Oh, I responded to that. I said mine. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
And
so you-
I responded just now with my suggestion that with the link there to check out quick facts, but data.census.gov is typically where we send people. But I also said that, of course, the State Data Center and myself are here to do any hands-on trainings with exercises and challenges and walk through everything for you at any point.
Okay, and we also have a question for how age data is collected. If someone has a birthday between the census that's distributed and collected, what age is counted? Gary already answered that it's all based on April 1st, 2020. So that's how the question is phrased.
For the decennial census, yes.
For the decennial census. How does it work for other surveys that they do?
I believe on the monthly the ACS, you fill it. I mean, whenever you get the survey, or if you're lucky enough to get the survey, when you're filling it out, it's that time period. I actually have never gotten it, so I can't swear to that one.
No, I do think you're right on that. Although we do have a lot of other surveys that are more specific. They're like our current population survey at times will say, as of August of last year, where so do be aware that some of that data, but that's all contained in the technical documents online for the surveys. So that's all on our website.
Awesome. And then we have another question about what's the difference between the census and American Community Survey data? Some measures are not available on one or the other. Is the ACS data estimates taken or extrapolated from census data but arranged differently? Is there a good layperson's description of the difference? And I'll let you guys answer that.
I'll give it a go. The easiest answer is that the ACS, as was mentioned earlier, it's the old long form. So the ACS asks questions on employment, income, poverty, disability, how lots of various housing characteristic questions. It still asks plumbing facilities and electricity and stuff like that. So it has all of the socio and economic data, really. The decennial only asks questions on age, sex, race, Hispanic origin, household relationship, and tenure. Do you own or rent your home? That's it. There was 10 questions. I mean, I think it was in 2010, that was their tagline. 10 questions, 10 minutes or 10 seconds. I don't remember exactly, but for the decennial, you're not getting most of the data that probably you as a planner are using on a regular basis. If you might use it once every decade just to kind of get a benchmark, but on a year-to-year basis, when you're looking for poverty rates in a specific city, that data more than likely comes from the American Community Survey. There are a couple other poverty measures that the Census Bureau has. But if you've called me, I'm probably giving you the ACS data unless you're asking me for another data source.
Right, and I would just add that we do conduct the American Community Survey every single year, and we publish, and it surveys 3.5 million addresses every year, and we publish that data throughout the year, and we do different types of estimates based upon the population threshold. So I'm trying to put a few slides in the chat for later, just for some more information on the ACS, but yeah.
And those are, that is 3.5 million Americans, not just Iowans. To answer the question.
Households, but yes, everyone,
households.
yeah.
Correct.
We're not quite to 3.2 yet.
And then with that, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, you can unmute your mic and feel free to chime in. And if not, I have a question for the speakers, which is just, based on the trends that have been discussed today, what are the really important things that we as planners need to be thinking about for the future, especially as it relates to those things that we deal with on a daily basis, like land use or transportation or housing?
I'll tackle that one. I think the two things, the urbanization patterns is huge. They're not new to Iowa. We've been seeing similar patterns just at kind of ebbing and flowing rates over the past 30, 40, 50 years, but it's just something that you can't ignore. And that has implications for just about everything related to planning. And I don't know how much the diversity issue, social justice, environmental justice, a lot of the federal grants that people are applying for now have new requirements that take into account social and environmental justice issues. And so I think race and ethnicity data are going to be more and more important in some of those applications as well.
I also think looking at that Latino population on the county level, because while 73 counties have lost population, 99 counties have seen increases in Latino population from 1980 to 2020. So the population growth may not be huge in those counties, but that is a population group that we are seeing increases in all 99 counties.
So one thing that I was curious about as you were talking, you're talking about how this is specific to Gary, but you can all chime in on this. Specifically that Iowa seems to be losing its native-born population from state to state migration. I was curious if you have any feeling on what sort of demographics are leaving. You talked about that you could talk for an entire presentation about where they're going to. I was just curious if you had any insight into that.
Well, one, we don't know that they're native Iowans. I mean, we don't necessarily know that people who are born in Iowa are leaving Iowa. We are seeing, and I hate the term brain drain, whatever you want to call it. We are seeing population loss after that age 25 age group, that 20 to 24, 25 and older. There always seems to be a little bit of a divot there on those pyramids that Liesl showed. Now, before that, and I didn't notice it. Liesl, what was your age pyramid just from 2020, or was it looking at change?
It was just 2020.
Okay, so I have a presentation that has the age pyramids on there too. And what was kind of always interesting was there was that divot in that 25 to 35, 40 group. And then there was almost always, and if you looked at it every 5 years, because of the ACS data or from the, where you're grabbing it from, I just use a 5-year group, 5-year age group, and that's why I did it 5 years. There was always kind of also a jut out right around 40 or 50, maybe 50 to 60. It appeared that possibly we were seeing increases, potentially people coming back to the state for those age groups. But the problem with all of this data and the specific age data is we don't know anything really. We're all making assumptions on why that little divot is there at age 25. Is that college students moving out? More than likely, probably. But that's not really a question that ever gets asked on a census form or on a ACS does ask questions on migration, so that might be a good source to kind of look at that, depending on how they cross tab it. And this is just my way of babbling to say I don't know. And usually what happens is when people ask me that question, I babble, and then I say, but you can contact Liesl up at Iowa State, and I'm sure she would have all of the answers for what's going on in the rural counties or in general.
Well, we are approaching 4 o'clock, so I do want to give people an opportunity to leave if they need to head out for another meeting. I'll keep this open for a couple more minutes after this in case any other questions come up, but I just want to say thank you to our speakers so much for being willing to spend an hour of your day to come and talk to us about the census. Thanks for all of you who attended in the audience to come and learn a bit more. And again, this is a monthly seminar that we do as the Iowa APA, and all these are available for CM credits. So with that, thank you very much. Someone had asked me too about if the slides are available. I can send out the slides. I don't know if we send them out as part of the APA, but we can sort that out. So I will put my email in the message and you can just ask me for it. Or we could send it out in the Friday update, says Liesl. So that would work great. So thanks, everyone. If anyone wants to stay on and ask any more questions, I'll be around for a few more minutes. And it looks like most people are heading away, so we'll
Kirk,
see.
I did just send you another copy of my slides, but I threw in 3 slides on the ACS.
Okay, sounds good. And I will, I'll send these to our president to make sure that she can send them out for our Friday update. But thanks everyone again. I really appreciate it and glad that you were able to join us.